Earth's Shifting Crust by Charles Halfgood, with a foreword by Albert Einstein, is a compelling enough piece of literature to look deeper into the cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis. Now, the problem is that Halfgood was infiltrated by the CIA early on and became, well, an asset. And all the work thereafter that he did was questionable at best. But many have been working on the concept of the cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis. In fact, the first ideas occurred in the late 1800s. And we'll get to all of that in just a moment. Now, what you're looking at is the cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis, which suggests that there have been geologically rapid shifts in the relative positions of the modern-day geographic pole. This is the rotational pole. So where once it is in the north, if the crust moves, this is where the pole would have been, it is now shifted. But these modern-day geographical locations of the poles and axis of rotation causing calamities such as floods and tectonic events are not supported by any geologic evidence. Why is that? There are some people that purport they have geologic evidence, but that evidence can be explained by other forces and factors. If the oceans have washed over major continents, we would have deposits of those oceans. We would have major tsunami deposits we could witness somewhere, anywhere, but they don't exist. So that is the major problem. Someone is telling a fib. Now, what we do know is that we have evidence of precession of the equinoxes and changes in the axial tilt of the Earth. But this change is on a much longer time scale. And it's a slow process and does not involve relative motion of the spin axis with respect to the planet. It's simply a top wobbling, where the rotational pole wobbles around an elliptical orbit on a 25,920-year precessional arc. We know the ancients witnessed this because of their portrayal of astrology on cave walls 40,000 years ago. And the fact that the works of von Deschen and others have proven that the precession of the equinox has been encoded into the megalithic structures worldwide. So we know this is being witnessed, which means that humanity has been well aware for tens of thousands of years, the only way they could have witnessed this. But let's get back to the cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis. Research shows that during the last 200 million years, a true polar wander of some 30 degrees has occurred. Now, this is according to the mainstream science. And they claim that no rapid shifts in Earth's pole were found during the last 200 million years. A characteristic rate of true polar wander is about 1 degree or less per million years. Between approximately 790 and 810 million years ago, according to scientists, not me, when the supercontinent Rhodina existed, two geographically rapid phases of true polar wander may have occurred. In each of these, the magnetic poles of Earth shifted 55 degrees from a large shift in the crust. Now, what I want to bring your attention to is the fact that The rotational pole has nothing to do with the magnetic pole. And a lot of people out there listening don't understand that. A lot of people commented on our recent video with Mario build reps, that the ancients had no way of determining magnetic north. And of course they didn't. They looked into the sky. They knew the rotational north. So this is like introductory 101 to cataclysmic pole shift theory. If you don't understand there are multiple poles, then you are completely lost. The planet has a rotational pole, the pole on which it spins upon, which brings us day and night, spring, summer, fall, and winter. But the magnetic pole has nothing to do with the rotational pole. The magnetic pole wanders around the Earth, and in fact is not observable by ancient humans. The only pole observable by ancient humanity is the rotational pole. And if that moves, we are all fluxed cosmically. Period. Now, to get further to the point, the geographic poles are defined by the points on the surface of the Earth that are intersected by the axis of rotation. And you do not need a compass to locate this. You just need to look at the sky every night and stare up at the sky for 12 hours, and you can see the rotational point. If you stay up all night and just look at the stars and come out and see how they're spinning, you too will be able to determine true north, the rotational north, and you will find Polaris spinning around in that north polar region. Spectacular. Now, independent of this idea, the pole shift hypothesis describes a change in the location of this rotational pole with respect to the underlying surface, a phenomenon distinct from the changes in axial orientation with respect to the plane of the ecliptic. Those are caused by precession and nutation, and amplified in the event of true polar wander. So if you don't understand what I'm saying by that, the 26,000 year precession or the wobble of the Earth has nothing to do with the rotation. The rotation is always constant in one place on the planet. And any ancient culture, 10, 20, 30, 50, 200,000 years ago, could have just stayed up all night, eaten some mushrooms, and looked up and saw the stars spinning around a central point. And they could draw it in the dirt and point right to it and do it again another night. And 1,000 nights later, they would have a lot of lines that all line up to the same spot. Similar to what Mario Build Reps did on Google Earth. Now, another thing we want to make clear is that the pole shift hypothesis is not connected with plate tectonics. The well-accepted geologic theory that the Earth's surface consists of solid plates which shift over viscous or semi-fluid asthenosphere, nor with continental drift, the corollary to plate tectonics, which maintains that the location of the continents have moved slowly over the surface of the Earth millions and millions of years. Resulting in the mountain uplifts we see, the volcanic arcs, and other phenomenon explained by, well, general geology. Now, we all know that the continents have moved slowly over the surface of the Earth. resulting in the gradual emerging and breakup of continents and oceans over hundreds of millions of years. The argument is the mechanism. Is it a slow shift, a slow moving conveyor belt that is described in the textbooks that I regurgitated to my students? Or is it something else? Something that picks up and shuts down. And then after it shuts down, our textbooks describe the quiescent period, the period beyond Cataclysmos. That's what I think is going on. Based on all the evidence I've looked at over 3 decades, it seems that the Earth goes quiet for about 10 to 20,000 years, every 100,000 years. And for about 80,000 years, the Earth goes wild, literally. The crust slides because there is a decoupling with the asthenosphere. Now, the asthenosphere is the ductal layer situated beneath Earth's rigid lithosphere. What does that even mean? Well, it means that the crust is floating on a plastic liquid zone called the asthenosphere, and that the plate tectonic activity happens above that, and that if there is a catastrophic crustal shift, so to speak, the asthenosphere would lose strength, and this is the lubricant or the plastic zone that would deform and allow the crust to slowly move. Now you have to understand, the asthenosphere is at such depth and pressure that no one has ever been able to reach it. Russia tried to. They got about 12 kilometers down, and it got too hot, and things started moving, and things broke. They were nowhere near the asthenosphere. They were trying to reach it, I believe, from the crust, which means they'd have to go 70, 80 kilometers. They got 12. If we were to go 12 kilometers in the middle of the ocean, on the ocean crust, we may reach the asthenosphere. It's much thinner there, as you can see here on the picture. Now, these aren't fantasies. We've echolocated this using gravity anomaly and other techniques where we can actually visualize the subsurface of the Earth. And so trying to drill to the asthenosphere through the crust is a bad idea. Trying to drill through it in the thinnest area in the deep ocean, well, it requires you to drop pipe through 5 or 6 miles of ocean water before you even hit the ocean crust. So there is the other problem. So the chances we'll ever get to the asthenosphere are slim at best. But what about Halfgood's idea? What about Earth's shifting crust? Does that have any plausibility? Now, in popular literature, many conjectures have been suggested involving very rapid polar shift. A slow shift in the poles would display the most minor alterations with no destruction. A more dramatic view assumes more rapid changes with dramatic alterations of geography and localized areas of destruction due to earthquakes and tsunamis. I don't know why they left out volcanic eruptions, because that's the main trigger, in my opinion, if this actually occurs. Now, early proponents of this idea are many. An early mention of the shifting of Earth's axis can be found as early as 1872 in an article entitled Chronologie historique des Mexicans by Charles Etienne Brasseur de Beaubourg. He was a specialist in Mesoamerican codices, and he interpreted ancient Mexican myths as evidence for 4 periods of global cataclysms that had begun around 10.5 BCE. That's 10,500 years BCE. 12,500 years ago, these would have begun. And that's according to a paper coming out in 1872. Who knew? Now you do. Now, in 1889, Jules Verne picked up on this and imagined the possible consequences of an artificial pole shift in his book, The Purchase of the North Pole. And you're looking at that book now. I would stock up on these. They will be worth a lot in the future. Now, in 1948, Hugh Atkinson Brown, an electrical engineer, advanced a hypothesis of catastrophic pole shift. Brown also argued that accumulation of ice at the poles caused recurring tipping of the axis, identifying cycles of approximately 7 millennia. In his controversial 1950 work, Worlds in Collision, Immanuel Velikovsky postulated that the planet Venus emerged from Jupiter as a comet. During 2 proposed near approaches in about 1450 BCE, he suggested that the direction of Earth's rotation changed radically, then reverted to its original direction in the next pass. This disruption supposedly caused earthquakes, tsunamis, and the parting of the Red Sea. Further, he said near misses by Mars between 776 and 687 BCE also caused Earth's axis to change back and forth by 10 degrees. Velikovsky cited historical records in support of his work. Although his studies were generally ridiculed by the scientific community, they still hold on today as important. Now, Charles Halfgood is now perhaps the best remembered early proponent in his books, The Earth's Shifting Crust, in 1958, which includes a foreword by Albert Einstein, as I mentioned in the beginning here. And then followed up by The Path of the Pole in 1970, which was bastardized because of his inclusion in the CIA and his work there for decades. Halfgood speculated that accumulated polar ice mass destabilizes Earth's rotation, similar to the work of Atkinson Brown back in 1948. In fact, he stole the idea, and it wasn't even new. And maybe that is part of the ruse. That Atkinson Brown was correct. Halfgood stole it. The CIA infiltrated it and shut it down. But all of this, in my opinion, is nonsensical, impossible. There's no, as a geologist, there's no geologic evidence for any of this occurring ever, because there would be evidence of it. And people like Doug Vogt and other non-scientists, in my opinion, purport evidence that does not exist. The channels that are on the continental margins on both sides of the continent can happen due to turbidity currents that flow down the side of the margin, the cliff. And we know this because there's evidence of turbidity currents dating back hundreds of millions of years, all the way through the Ordovician and earlier. So as long as there's a continent and a continental margin, there's going to be subsea channels and turbidity currents moving material deep into the abyss. And they form channels. You don't have to drain the oceans. Furthermore, the whole concept of draining the oceans or dropping sea level 1,000 feet to create these features is ludicrous. Where does the water go? And then it returns immediately? So apparently these scientists are less than critical thinkers. But they certainly are, well, alarmists. And they want to scare the shit out of you. Because they need to sell books. Did you notice that all of the people in the modern age talking about the cataclysm or cataclysmic or geology that's not normal, they have very little training. They have very little background knowledge or experience in the field, and yet they want you to believe that they're correct. I watch some of the most ridiculous podcasts from people that are fans of the electric universe. They go out and look at geology and they start explaining it, but they have no background in geology. They don't even know what a sediment is. They don't know the difference between a dune deposit or a siltstone, a sandstone that was deposited by water or wind. They have no idea the different types of rocks. If you give me a rock from anywhere in the world here in my barn, I will be able to identify where it came from. The process is involved. Yet these charlatans claim they have insight into catastrophic geology because they walk out there and they make up fairy tales. It's completely ludicrous and insane, in my opinion. And it's disheartening because people follow them and they listen to them and they have no experience talking about the topics they're talking about. Then they go in their basement and they electrocute diatomaceous earth and they say, see, this is exactly what's happening on Mars. How stupid are those thoughts? It's insane. It's not science. It's science fiction. But what we bring you are all of the facts, historical, documented, and scientific information and literature peer-reviewed, which are showing a different narrative. And we don't have to walk up into a ravine in Utah and make up a story, because the story is already there. And we know about the rocks and how they're deposited. And we can explain why they are deposited that way. That's what a geologist does. And a catastrophic like myself, a catastrophic geologist with a multidisciplinary approach, has a background in chemistry, physics, the esoteric, and geology, and has decades worth of field experience to back it up. None of the others do. And that is one of the points we want to drive home tonight before we dive deeper. Who should you listen to? Where should you get your information from? Well, you should be critically thinking about things like the review of the large low shear velocity provinces and ultra low velocity zones. These have only come to light recently. And what they show is that, well, rapid pole shift crustal slip probably can't happen. In fact, it's probably impossible. These large, low velocity shear zones exist under areas of the Earth where volcanic activity occurs, like the East African Rift Zone, or Hawaii, or Indonesia, places where large volcanic eruptions occur. And they connect all the way to the inner core. And if the crust were to slip, then they would decouple from these large, low velocity zones and they would no longer be fed with magma. Now, I thought at first maybe I could determine that there was some evidence of crustal slip. See here how we can move the crust? It started here and it moved this way. But there is no general consensus to that idea. In fact, if the crust slips recently, all the time, every 100,000 years or so, or 26,000 years as some purport, then there would be no need for these large low velocity zones feeding magma from deep in the inner core to these volcanic areas on the crust. They would decouple. They wouldn't match back up after this slippage. It's stupid. And anyone claiming that there's catastrophic crustal slip, there's no evidence for it. Zero. But there is evidence for slow movement. Perhaps at the Mohorovic discontinuity or in the Asthenosphere. It's one or the other. That's the only decoupling place. And because of the nature of the depths and pressure, it wouldn't be a liquid phase. It wouldn't immediately become liquid where it could slide around. This is a plastic zone where movement is inches per year. And maybe you could increase that to meters per month, but certainly not a catastrophic slippage of crust on the Earth. We would notice that. But still, if you moved meters per year, you could build mountains in decades. And also, this would result in massive amounts of hot magma coming up from these low velocity zones up onto the crust. The shift would crack the crust impressively and allow apertures for this deep magma to erupt as kimberlites and other Plinian eruptions similar to Hunga Tonga, the likes of which you've never seen, and yet we just saw one. So, we're just starting to tippy-touch the topic, and there's a lot more to talk about. The Asthenosphere, the work of Mario Bildreps, and the fact that he's a mathematician, and he just looked at the pyramids worldwide, and he came up with the conclusion that the crust does slip. And there is evidence for that. And he's the only one with actual specific geographic evidence of crustal slip that's provable, period. No one else has it. No one's talking about him because everyone else is wrong and they're trying to tell you the sun's going to explode and you better hurry up and buy land near 16 state penitentiaries or else you're going to die, and buy my books. But we don't deal with all that garbage. We deal with pure science, pure data, and the data suggests that the Earth does slowly move. The crust on the asthenosphere at just below the Mohorovic discontinuity, that the asthenosphere becomes plastic and there is some slippage. It's faster than normal, but not catastrophic in a sense that you would notice it. Well, you would notice it in the fact that thousands of volcanoes would be erupting, the skies would darken, and you had no idea what was going on while you heard a strange noise rumbling beneath your feet, because earthquakes would be 1,000 times greater than now. Volcanic eruption, the same. The amount of material ejected into the atmosphere and the stratosphere would be 1,000 times anything you've seen in the last 200 years. That would cool the Earth rapidly and bring us into ice age realms, where the crust would continue to slip for tens of thousands of years and drive us deeper and deeper into the mass extinction that occurs when the temperature rises back to normal. At the bottom of these events, we've dropped 20 degrees C at the max, and then it rises back up again. None of those creatures that have adapted for 80,000 years could ever survive in the new interstadial, the one we're living in. And there's more. If you look at the isochrons from the mid-ocean ridges, they prove the expansion theory of plate tectonics. The Earth has not been a constant size. It's impossible. There's no way to explain any of the biological entities living here if you keep the Earth the same size, period. If anyone wants to argue me on that, please drop me an email at oppenheimerranch@gmail.com, and we would be happy to explain why you're wrong. Hope you got something out of the video. It's gone way too long. And we're just getting started. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Share this with like-minded people. Check out Mario Bildreps and our interview we just did with him. And there'll be more in the series coming. And no one's bumming, because we are bringing all of the disciplines together with one conclusion. And the good thing is that there is no mass calamity coming. It's a slow, destructive freight train. It takes geologic time, hundreds or thousands of years, to shift into the next realm, even if the crust is slipping. But once the first VEI 7 volcanic eruption happens, your life as you know it ends, because you're living in the modern world and you rely on technology and electricity and supermarkets and stores, that's how we all die. The majority of the people in the world cannot survive if the power goes out. You will all succumb to the Stone Age. And that's a boom to knowledge. Stay tuned for the next episode in the Cataclysmic Pole Shift Hypothesis series. And that's a boom.